Asteroid of fear.
Welcome to another episode of the Men of the House podcast. And on today's episode, I have William or Bill Cohen, and we are going to talk about health caregiving. And I've talked about this in a couple other episodes, but we're also definitely going to talk about how males stepping into a caregiving role. Um, the world's evolving and what we do and how we do it is evolving. And as kind of a caregiver myself to my dad and to my grandparents in the past, this topic is, uh, it's very near and dear to me, because we're all going to experience it at some point where we probably have to give for a grandparent, a parent, possibly a sibling. And so, yeah, I want to talk about that, get the ins and outs and what we can do to make it better, but also just to prepare ourselves because we're all subject to the same end. Nobody's getting out alive, and we're all going to face it at some point. So, how are you doing today, Bill?
Doing great. Honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming. And yeah, I'm definitely interested in getting this perspective, especially like we had talked about before, getting kind of a male perspective because we are seeing more fluidity in, I would say, traditional gender and household roles. You know, I think, I've interviewed a couple of men about men's groups and even women, but one thing is definitely for sure, and that is what is expected of men has changed and evolved over the years. And it's not just that we go to work, earn the paycheck, and come home and do the normal kind of masculine father things, but really there's this kind of forward push into men being a little more involved emotionally and kind of in that motherly sense and being a part of and talking about feelings and whatnot, and just how we contribute to our family, the well-being, and starting to talk about feelings as opposed to stuffing these things down. And I think kind of men stepping into more caregiving roles with family, especially if it's a mother, maybe as such in your case, it's definitely a different dynamic. And I can speak to that as an only child. I'm an only son, so at some point I will have to help care for my mother, I'm sure. But I'm fortunate enough to have my wife with me. But yeah, so it's an interesting spin and thought process on how we're going to go about that. So
You
but
may
yeah,
have
give
already
us
you may have already figured this out. Do you know the one advantage to being an only child when you're in a caregiving role?
you don't have to drown out the noise of everyone else's opinions.
Exactly. Bingo. You make the
Yeah,
decisions and who's going to question you, right?
yeah, you don't have to fight
Mm.
with siblings about that. And I've kind of seen that happen as, and I've mentioned in other podcasts before, but my wife caregives and I often help her because she also does kind of her own business and, you know, she's taken care of some elderly people in which I've helped. And some of the reason we do that is because there might be a local sibling and there might be a sibling 2 hours away. But we've, the sibling 2 hours away has hired us to step in and help out because the sibling who's actually local doesn't make the time to care for their
Mm.
parent. And then when the sibling 2 hours away passed away and the one sibling took over, all of a sudden it was like they put them in a assisted living home. We were kind of cut off and we never knew where she went and could never get that information to even visit. And then she passed away and we were
Mm.
never able to see her. And so, yeah, those things definitely happen and that family drama. But, if I
Mhm.
could say anything is, you know, don't let that get in the way of what the purpose is. This is your family member. You're there to care. And remember what the goal is at the end of the day is to care for your loved one and ensure that they um, get it what it is they need, not just physically, but also emotionally as they're transitioning through a different stage of life.
Right. And that's why I became a trained elder mediator, because as well as doing caregiving support, is because some families can't decide on ordering pizza for
Yeah.
dinner, let alone who, where, how to take care of their loved one. So I'm increasingly finding myself in that role, sometimes in conjunction with the caregiving support, where I'm playing that neutral third party to help them focus on the person who needs the care. It's not
Oh,
about you. It's not
right.
about you. You have to focus on your loved one with dementia or whatever the condition is.
Well, how'd you get into this? Let's start
Sure.
off at ground zero. Give us a little bit about your background
All right.
and just an idea because you kind of gave us a hint as to what you're doing now.
Yeah.
But what were you doing before? Kind of what'd you dream that you'd be doing before? And then I'm sure there was something that happened that propelled you into this world, and this is what you now do. And yeah, give us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, overview is that if you had asked me 19, 20 years ago what was going to transpire and happen with my mom, and I'd be doing what I'm doing today and talking to you, I'd say you're crazy. You could make up this scenario. So working back, I was first in the hospitality industry, then I was in financial services. I worked for the state of Oregon, completely unrelated job. I'm originally from New England. I'm from
Okay.
Hartford, went to school in Boston, mostly vacation Vermont, so I'm a New Englander. But I've been in Oregon for almost 40 years.
Oh, wow.
My mom moved down to Biloxi, Mississippi back in the mid 70s. And going forward, and we had a very close relationship. I visit her often. I even moved to New Orleans for a while. I was in Sarasota for a while, so it
Hmm.
wasn't too far away. But I move away, and then in the early to mid 2000s, she starts showing some disturbing signs: agitation, paranoia, yes, short-term memory loss, not taking care of the finances, not taking care of the house. It became obvious because not only was she a master printmaker, she was an artist and teacher, but she was a early adopter of a Mac in the
Oh.
80s. In her 60s, most
Mhm.
women weren't adopting a Mac at that time, and she was handling all the finances. So the drop off in her abilities was becoming stark. However, she was taking care of my late stepfather, who was on and off hospice. And we were wondering, oh, well, maybe, maybe she's just tired, stressed, getting older, whatever, right? And we are thinking, if he moved into a care community or passed away, would she bounce back? We never got that opportunity, because what happened this month, 19 years ago, on the Gulf Coast in New Orleans?
What was it?
Katrina,
Oh,
Hurricane Katrina. Yeah. So the house that they had evacuated safely, but the house they had lived in for decades was completely swept away down to the foundation. She fully expected to come back to that house, and the trauma of seeing it gone exacerbated, accelerated whatever was going on with her. We later realized it was Alzheimer's, but we knew there was some form of mild cognitive
how
impairment.
was that being relayed back to you? Since you were in a different location, she was
Yeah.
caring. Who were the first people to kind of take notice and alert you that something was a little amiss?
Well, it's a little bit of everything. My brother was in the area.
Hmm.
An aunt who lived in Florida would go visit, step family. So my own visits was a little bit of everything.
Okay.
One example was that like I said, she used to do the finances. She'd even do the taxes. But for some reason, they were just sitting on the dining room table. They were not moving.
Mm.
She no longer could handle them. So these were some disturbing signs. I even took her to a geriatric physician, got her on one of the medications that really doesn't do much. It's not a cure, just helps slow the progression, Namenda,
Hmm.
that type of thing. We were treating more her agitation, her anxiety, depression, that type of thing. So yeah, that's what we did. And we were starting to take steps and wondering what are we going to do. In fact, my mom even said, "Oh, we maybe move closer to the shore." They were about 5 miles inland,
Right.
and that never happened because never got a chance to see how that would affect things or improve things.
So what happened with house gets wiped out and that trauma? What happens from there? How is the family displaced, and what is the progression of disease and factors start looking like at that
Sure.
point.
Right. And I'll tell you a quick story right afterwards. Too. So they evacuate to Wilmington, North Carolina with step family.
Okay.
And so, like I said, they were safe, bring my stepfather and my mom back together. My brother went his own way to Texas with his lady friend. And within a couple of days after the storm, mom is trying to escape. She's out in the driveway. She did not have a good relationship with my stepbrother. I'm not going to get into that. It's just a fact. And fortunately, another family member got her on the phone and said, Sheila, my mom's name, if you don't get back in that house, you may end up somewhere you do not want to be, like institutionalized. She got that message. She still had enough cognitive ability. I was planning on going very shortly anyway, get on the next possible plane. She's glad to see me. And I have a term as opposed to white lie, therapeutic lie, call it compassionate deception.
Oh, I have to use
I was
that.
not doing any harm. I wasn't telling her the whole truth. I was doing what was in her best interest. So I said, Mom, tomorrow we're going to go see a new doctor. Oh, okay, that's a good idea. I'm in a new place, right? What I didn't tell her is we were going to the ER. We were going to emergency. That night, about 10 hours between being in the ER and an adjoining conference room, hardest emotional night of my life. Because my mom, I hardly recognized. She was very agitated, stressed out, almost like a caged animal. Her face was almost unrecognizable. They get her admitted. They get her on medication. I get off the elevator the next morning. She sees me and says, "Oh, there you are. There's my savior." She wasn't mad at me. It was the disease. She was scared, right?
Wow.
Know what was happening to her. So going forward, we got her in after we got out of that house. She was in an assisted living, which was with memory care,
Right.
and that type of thing. Then she ended up with my aunt down in Delray Beach, Florida, for a while. I'm doing the cross country trips. I'm handling the caregiving long distance, starting to handle the finances, the taxes, real estate, her care, everything with the support of my family.
Right.
It was collaborative and sequential tag team. I started attending a support group. I started getting counseling. I was looking at a care community out here in Portland. This is all while I'm handling.
Well, what made you, what gave you the wherewithal to even seek out the support group and resources? Because I feel like the other caregivers I've interviewed, it seems like that almost has to be told to them by whether it's a therapist or somebody else because they get so overwhelmed. How did you find it? What seems to be more proactively?
And I'll mention one thing, by the way, and I'm also, while I'm doing all this, I have a full-time job about 35 miles south of where I live, and I had which I did not like, it was not fulfilling for the compensation of the benefits, and I had a micromanager narcissist boss from hell.
Oh,
so you can imagine where my stress level was.
You're lucky you didn't end up in the care facility.
Yeah. So it was, I'm pretty sure it was my wife's suggestion, hey, maybe you should consider looking at a support group. And I contacted the Alzheimer Association and found one. There were very few back then, not like there's tons available all over, virtually and in person. But I found one that was during the week in the evening so I could go after work. And the interesting thing is I kept going, and I lead that group now 19 years later.
Awesome.
I've been leading it for 11 years because I saw the benefit. People who were either all other caregivers or people who were had lost their loved one kept going to help others through the journey. And the advice was invaluable, the support, the guidance, people who have been there. And fortunately, I also found a good counselor who was from my background, so it helped me deal with my family. I did have I could get into some of the legal stuff, but I had aunts, for instance, who had a lot of opinions, always in mom's best interest, but they also knew my name was on the paper. I had the power of attorney. So the Alzheimer's Association also has lots of information, resources for the support groups, education. They have a 24/7 helpline that will always be answered if somebody needs help or just has a question. It's a great way to go. So I sought out that support, and it was, I don't know how I could have gotten through it otherwise.
Yeah.
Those were very, very important. Also, and we can talk about this more at length, is the self-care. I mean, those things were part of the self-care, but also getting away from my desk and taking a walk, going for a massage. A massage to me became not a luxury, but a necessity.
Yeah, how did you, well, and this is kind of that key part of, showing how you were a little bit more proactive as to what I'd mentioned before, but part of these conversations, especially for the audience, is to put your mind in a space that this self-care is proactive, that you're not having to be told to do this, or you're not having to think like, oh, maybe I should do this. Because if you're having to do that, chances are you're already behind the curveball.
Yep. And self-care is not just, it's not selfish, it's vital.
Yes.
Because caregivers will burn out, they'll get sick or get worse. And I don't know if you've ever heard this statistic when it comes to dementia in particular. I don't know if you've ever heard of Teepa Snow. Your wife probably has, but she's a well-known dementia trainer in the Carolinas. Teepa Snow, great videos on YouTube and her own website. And she cited that two things, actually. One was that when I was starting 20 years ago, 1 out of every 5 caregivers was a male. Now it's more like 2 out of 5, 40%, approximately. More and more men are stepping into that role. The other thing that I heard was for caregivers, dementia caregivers 70 years or older, about 2/3 predecease the person they are caring for.
I believe it.
That is not only tragic, but it's preventable. Because if you don't take care of your own health, go to see your doctor, go get a break, get support, that type of thing, you are a candidate for burnout or worse.
Yeah, it kind of bleeds off into this. I think of our situation, and we're kind of a multi-generational household, and being Latino, and the names and players kind of circulate through the house. But let's say you had my grandparents who were both in their either late 70s, early 80s, both with predisposition or genetic components as it relates to dementia or Alzheimer's. And you see signs in one, it stresses out the other one. And then this one can slowly, and then my wife and I, or my mother, other people into the household and start kind of caring for both, or taking the stress off of one. And then one kind of exits, and it becomes this circle of swapping things. But yeah, I could definitely see, not just the dementia or Alzheimer's kind of component, the agitation and all that. People in their 70s and 80s, depending, aren't, it's still a physical job, and there's still a lot to caring for somebody like that, minus adding that. And if you're at an age where you're older as well and you have physical problems and stuff,
Or
then
what if one of the spouses, usually the woman, is smaller, lighter,
yes,
and he is bigger and heavier, and if he falls, can't take care of him, can't pick him up, can't help him in the shower, that type of thing.
that's happened
That's a
multiple
recipe,
times.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's scary.
What, well, so
I guess we didn't quite finish the story
yeah.
about leading to where I am today, is that then in 2008, I brought her out here. Quick little story too. My other aunt, who eventually moved out here to help take care of her from Manhattan and stayed, she flies out my mother out here. She wanted to come out to be with me, and she looks at the care community that I wanted her to be in. The assisted living side looks like a hotel, beautiful, modern, still does. She walks in and said, "This is nice, Bill. I could live here. Can I afford it?" another compassionate deception. Yes, mom. I knew she was running out of money,
Right.
probably within the year. But for now, I was saying, yes, mom, yeah, you can live here and you can afford it. If they let her stay, which they did. They thought that she would be there less than a year, the way she was declining and what they saw. And that's exactly what happened. 10 months later, she moves across the street to their memory care unit, secure lockdown, because during a norovirus quarantine, she starts wandering. She starts doing dangerous behaviors, because even though it was, and a lot of people with dementia this way, they may not take that initiative to get out of the room or know where to go. But when she got out, usually she was fine, she was social. But when she's confined to her room, kind of like what we saw the pandemic, she started acting out and doing dangerous things. And they said, Bill, she needs 24/7 care. This was right when she was running out of money. And that was another tough period where my family really helped, especially my wife. And we moved her into the memory care. This is a building that has since been renovated, but it looked like the old nursing homes.
Mm-hmm.
But the care was wonderful. And I love to mention is that, like, the head nurse was there over 30 years.
Wow.
Right? It gives you an idea. That's a good key, that if the staff is there a long time,
Says a lot.
probably going to be good care. They're
Yeah.
treating them well, and they will treat your loved one well. So
Well, and they
the
enjoy it. You don't
Sarah,
do something for 30 years if there's not something about it that's fulfilling.
nobody's gonna get wealthy, maybe except the stockholders.
Yeah.
Are gonna get wealthy in doing senior care. It's a labor of love. It's gratifying, although
It
it's
is.
very challenging. So she was in memory care for about 4 years. She passed away at age 83, and this was 11 years ago, this past February. Now, I start going forward. I kept going to that support group for a little bit. Like I said, I became the facilitator a few months later, not what I was expecting. And I started doing the walk to end Alzheimer's, and I was doing advocacy at the Capitol to get more funds for research.
What gave you that desire? What made you say, like, no, I need to keep this going forward?
I think is because everything I was doing was, well, you can, regardless of faith, one of the
Right.
things that binds us all together is the 10 Commandments. Honor thy mother and thy father. I had a close relationship with both my biological father and my stepfather and my mother. And when I stepped into that role, there was no question. And then afterwards, I did this all for my mom. I'm going to go forward and do these other things in her honor and memory. And I didn't dwell on the loss. I had already grieved when she was
Right.
alive, because she was no longer the person she used to be, right? You know that she's going to pass away. You're losing her. Besides anticipatory grief, there's also ambiguous. They are still alive, but they're not the person they used to be.
Yeah.
Inside, yes, there's still a person there, right?
Yeah.
So going forward, I had already grieved. Fortunately, I took a trip to Costa Rica right after she passed away. That really helped me a lot, because that's a beautiful place to be. So a few months later, or a couple years later, I'm approaching retirement with the state, thinking I'm just going to do more volunteer work. And I came across this concept, and we can talk about this more in detail, of a caregiving support consultant. So my really, really short version of all that is, I turned my loss, my pain, into my passion and my encore career.
Yeah, and the reason I'd ask that question is because the thing is with that long, you had mentioned you had already kind of grieved in process because it was a long process. But I could imagine that so many people at the end of, like, what would be considered like a marathon, that they're like, oh, it's over, I'm done, and I'm gonna move on and
Walk away.
recoup all the years I invested elsewhere,
Mhm.
and have that freedom. And so to me, I find it fascinating that when most people would say, okay, I had enough of it, and go a different direction and kind of pour into themselves, that you actually reversed that and said, no, I'm going to continue to pour into others.
Right. And everybody grieves in a different way anyway.
Yeah.
Some never can get over the pain. Obviously, it depends upon the circumstances, depends upon the relationship. But like I said, I had a close relationship with my mother. It was hard. It was gut-wrenching to watch all that. It was emotional, but I felt it was very gratifying to take care of her.
How did the pecking order work in terms of, me being an only child, not having siblings? How was it decided you were kind of the person she would go to, or she would go to Portland versus with some other siblings, or, how does that work in the hierarchy of
Well,
siblingship?
this is one of those situations, and I see this more and more with a lot of my clients and support groups, more and more men stepping into the role. It doesn't always fall upon a female family member, and it shouldn't always. And I think because of she brought up my strong nurturing side.
Mhm.
I would responsibility was important to me, that there was no question that I would take care of my mom. I'm not going to get into the details. It's better that my brother, I have one brother,
Mhm.
did not end up getting power of attorney and taking care of her. She probably would have ended up in Medicaid a lot sooner. You can read between the lines on that
Yeah.
one. So but again, other family members, my wife was very supportive. She wasn't directly involved with the care and the instances, but she helped support me so I could take care of mom.
Right.
Other family members helped in different ways. Like one cousin, after she lost her computer in the storm, he set her up with a new little mini Mac at her care
Mhm.
facility and would occasionally service it as needed. Other people donated money and gift cards and food and clothing and all kinds of things. But like I mentioned earlier, I had two aunts. They were her two sisters were the most involved, and they had, again, a lot of opinions, but they always had mom's best interests at heart. And they knew I was the final say on the power of attorney, knowing that I would also do what was best for mom.
Right.
I didn't have ulterior motives. Unfortunately, that does happen sometimes with family members. They may be saying, oh, we shouldn't put her into a care facility, spend too much money, when they're thinking, I want some of the inheritance, right? We
Mm.
don't want to spend it all because I want some. They may not say it, but that's what their actions tell you, right? Or they just really don't care. They'll be saying things like, I'm too far away, I'm too busy, I can't deal with it, it's all your problem. Yeah, unfortunately, that does happen.
Man,
I did not have to deal with that, fortunately.
I could see where that would be tough, especially as an only child. I get to make my own decisions for me, and nothing really ever has to be discussed. But, as I'd mentioned before, and probably a lot of the listeners know, is that my wife is a caretaker for people. And, from the outside, we step in because sometimes there are siblings. There's one local, one hours away, and for
Cross
whatever
country.
reason, the local one can't seem to,
Yeah.
visit or take them to appointments or whatever, which is fine. I mean, that's what we do and that's what we're here for, and everybody's situation is different.
But
But
but family can be as you define it. It can help and support can come from friends,
mhm,
neighbors, coworkers or ex-coworkers, charitable organization, your church, whatever organization. I mean, you mentioned earlier about extended multi-generational family. That's how we all used to be.
yeah,
We'd either age at home with our families or last resort end up in the so-called nursing homes, right? But there's so many more options nowadays. Plus, now some cultures, yes, are still multi-generational. A
mhm,
lot of Latinos, a lot of Asians, you see that
mhm,
quite a bit, more than other cultures. But the tendency is to, they age in place as long as they can at home, maybe bring in care, or they end up in a care community. And each situation is a little bit different. But at least there are more options than there used to be. We know there's the adult care homes, which are like living at home in a smaller setting, a little more
yeah,
intimate, probably better food too.
yeah. What was the most difficult thing to get a handle on? Because when all these things come about, and um, I've been mostly a guest this week, but I was on vacation. My dad ended up in the ICU with
Mhm.
a tube in his throat recently. And there was all this, we didn't know because it was kind of like it happened unexpectedly. And then there's all this stuff of kind of like what you're saying, advanced directives, who's responsible of making all these choices. And he's since improved, but it definitely, because, this was something that was supposed to be routine and it became unroutine very quick. And
Mm-hmm.
so it spawned up all these feelings,
Mm-hmm.
emotions, this overwhelm of advanced directives, um, this, that, the other, insurance policies, all kinds of stuff like bills, banking information. If something were to happen, what do I do with his lease, his car, blah, 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 blah. What was the most challenging thing when you stepped into this situation? Because you mentioned a couple of times of she was running out of money. There's insurance. I come from a medical background, so um, there's insurance things. There's all kinds of mess that has to be dealt with. What did you find most challenging? How did you deal with it? And how do you recommend people get ahead of this?
Mm-hmm. Don't try to do it all at once, and don't try to do it all by yourself.
Okay.
And basically, and since you alluded to certain fields, is you basically have to go into triage mode. I wish I had learned that sooner. That, like the battlefield or in the ER, this is the most important thing. Got to take care of that. This will be next. Everything else will have to wait. Because I was handling just about everything. I probably should have gotten more help or asked for more help, but I didn't quite know how to do that. I was thinking like, and this goes back to the male thing, that we look at it like a project, a job, a series of tasks. I can handle this. I can do this. I don't need any help, which is why most men don't go to support groups in the past anyway, or go for counseling, looking for support, because they see that as a sign of weakness, whereas it is a sign of strength to say, I need some help here. How can you help me? Even if it's a little bit. And it might be, and I say this to caregivers a lot, think about all the different jobs that you have to do as a caregiver. You're the cook and bottle washer and nurse and the launderer and you name it, everything, bookkeeper, that if you make that list of all those things and people want to help, right?
Yeah.
And if they say, how can I help? Oh, would you mind picking up the dry cleaning for me? Oh, you have a son, right? Do you think they could mow the lawn? Just little things like that. Oh, do you have a couple of hours just spend time with John?
Yeah. I
I
heard,
gotta
I
go. I
heard,
gotta go get my haircut. I gotta go, or I gotta go for a massage, or I want to go have
I
coffee
heard
with
one
somebody.
lady mention that she goes, like you said, people want to help, but they often don't know how. And if you can give them exact direction, it's usually always a yes. Because, if you
Mhm.
leave it up to them, it's like, well, yeah, people always
Mhm.
say, I'm willing to help. Just let me know what you need. But the key is you on the other side need to kind of go with that clarity and
Mhm.
specificity and say exactly what you need because
Mhm.
otherwise they would say you're not going to get what you don't ask for.
Right, exactly. Or on the other hand, most people, okay, they might say, I'm going to come by, or they want to, but they don't know what to do or what to say, or even whatever you need. Do you come empty-handed? No. Bring a dish, bring a casserole, right?
Yeah, man. So did you find because everybody's literacy in so many areas is different. And um, you know, for instance, just the whole money and medical portion.
Mhm.
How was that for you? How'd you navigate? A lot of people barely understand their own insurance. How did you
Mhm.
begin to understand hers and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff? And what were kind of some of the resources you use there?
I'll tell you a quick story before that.
Hmm.
I'm almost sound like some of the politicians' debates. They want to answer more about what they were at before they answer the real question. But about asking for help or
Hmm.
at care community, at the memory care, what I like to say is the care was exceptional. The coffee was institutional. During the last 2 weeks before she passed away, she's on hospice. Another norovirus quarantine happened, unfortunately. My aunt and I are the only ones allowed in the building besides staff and the residents. And I get on social media, on Facebook, and said, could somebody please bring me a mocha? two different friends from two different coffee places show up at the front desk with a mocha for me. And I still remember who they are, and I still thank them occasionally. You were a lifesaver that day. But yeah, they just needed to know what to do, and they were very happy to do so, because otherwise, poor Bill's sitting there in the care facility, right?
Yeah.
Waiting. So going back to your question, it helps that I have 2 business degrees, know enough to be dangerous about finances and taxes and things like that, insurance. I can still, even though I haven't been in the financial services industry, I can read a long-term care policy for somebody, because it's hard for a layperson to understand those, the little fine print. That wasn't the situation with my mom, but it was more handling things. We set up what was called a Medicare Special Needs Income Cap Trust as she ran out of money. That's what helped us through that, knowing that she was not going to be able to pay for her full care. Fortunately, she was able to go on Medicaid easily. It was not an ordeal. We had the care facility, a good relationship with the caseworker. Oh, I can see your situation. We can fill in the blanks, check all the boxes later, admit her, put her in the nursing and the memory care. And what we did is an income cap trust, for those who don't know, is it allows you to become eligible and stay eligible for Medicaid. All your money goes into the trust, whatever income. She had some retirement fund, Social Security coming in. Later,
Right.
she got my late stepfather's federal pension. So everything goes into the trust, and whatever goes in goes out to pay the care community. Whatever is left on her expenses is paid by the state. Theoretically, at the end of when she passed away, if there was anything there, it was zero. But if there had been, it would have reverted to the state. So that's how that worked. And I was able to follow along. And every time we did our review each year, I'm not worried about you, Bill. You're keeping all your records just perfectly. But you go back to the insurance and everything else, it helped that I had been in the industry and I knew the terms and knew how to communicate with people. I mean, part of the communication was with the care staff. Some people are real, shall we say, jerks about it.
Yeah.
You do this, you do this, and that's just going to antagonize people. But by communicating with them and holding them accountable, this is what's in the care plan, but working with them to take care of mom, because they're trying their best. Usually things are a little challenged these days, right? More than they had been. You can get good care, right? It's interesting. It just made me think also that one of my friends, she was a fellow alumnus from my university. Her mom was in that memory care at the same exact time.
Oh, wow.
So, and she felt the same way. The care was good. She was retired at that point, but she spent a little more time there. I was working and my aunt helped me on that. We were just each visit as we could. But after my mom passed away, as like I said, I didn't have any problem about going back there for any reason. I was still friends with the staff. And like I said, I went into the field. That friend of mine never went back. It was just too painful, too bad a memory. So people again react in a different way.
So, okay, all this happens. We'll go back a little bit. Your mother passes away. You decide that you're going to continue to give. Now, is this where you start Cohen caregiving, or how did this kind of concept come to fruition? What was the goal and intention of it? And what was it like starting it? Because obviously this was something you're very passionate about, but what I try to get to is, hey, there's probably going to be difficulties regardless of how much passion you got, and hopefully the passion is what gets you through the obstacles and hurdles.
Great question. There was a couple of years gap between when mom died and when I started looking at this. Like I said, I thought I was going to just do more volunteer work, but I came across this concept of caregiving support. And let's go back a bit. This is what I ran into. The emphasis, rightly so, whatever condition, is on the person with the disease or condition, right? Because they can't take care of themselves, may not be able to make their own decisions.
Right.
But who is saying to the caregiver, the family member, how are you doing? what support and resources do you need? The problem is that, especially when it comes to dementia, as opposed to some other conditions like cancer or cardiovascular, there's a plan, there's a treatment, right? And with dementia, if you get a diagnosis, which you don't always hear, because they're not really sure, right? It's
Right.
hard to diagnose without further testing, or possibly after they pass away in an autopsy, you don't really know. The problem is that people feel let down. So where's the plan? Where's the treat? Where's the pamphlet to take care of my loved one? It's more like, well, good luck, keep them safe and out of pain.
Yeah.
So I felt that very lacking, and it hasn't improved much. I hear that from my clients. I hear that from my support group attendees. So I'm trying to fill in that gap. What I ended up doing was, after hearing about it, is I got very active on LinkedIn, of all places. Instead of a job search tool, which is still, of course, I got rid of a lot of people who were never helpful. I was never going to have any connection. They were useless as far as my future network. I
Right.
started looking for everybody, not just nationally or in the Pacific Northwest, internationally, in elder care, dementia care, senior care, and setting up a conversation that says, what do you do? How do you get paid? How do you market yourself? What do you think about what I'm going to do to fill in that gap and be an advocate and an advisor to caregivers? And people said, besides telling me about theirs, and some of them are still helping me today.
Right.
Right. If I'd say somebody, I'm thinking about somebody in South Florida that I connected with back then, I said, I've got a client there and we need some resources. Who's an elder law attorney? Who's going to be in home care? What's a good assisted living? That type of thing. Answers, because they have the same mindset, thinking together. That's where, and we'll get back to the certified senior advisor aspect. So I went forward from there, late 20, I've got to remember the year, 2016. I started moving forward and making plans. At the beginning of 2017, I registered with the state, used up all my vacation time, because I was going to, I didn't mention this one thing, I was retiring in April of 2017. I didn't just give the state, my employer, 2 weeks notice. I didn't give them 2 months notice. I gave them 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Because I said, when I hit 25 years and age 65, I'm done. You can't afford me. You can't pay me enough. Not one day more. And I actually had an app, you've probably seen, like a countdown.
Yeah.
I did a retirement countdown.
Awesome.
So I had always started doing the business before I even retired. I couldn't use my sick leave. I probably should have years ago, but I didn't use it very much. But I started networking and going to senior care meetings and meeting everybody I could to build it. Now, I'm going to kind of guess where you might go with another question, challenges. So I'm doing something that very few people do. There's only a handful around the country. The closest to where we are, a lot of people think I'm like one of the adult placement or senior housing advisors.
Right.
I work with them, but I don't do that because I can't keep track of all the care communities and care homes, et cetera. That's what I rely upon them. And most of them are certified senior advisors like myself, especially one company. You've heard of Oasis Senior Advisors?
Hey, after you're done listening to this amazing podcast, be sure to give it a 5-star rating, then go check out the other podcasts in the Podcast Connection Network, including my own, Everything's Connected. Check us all out. The link will be in the episode's description.
Maybe.
Yeah, some of the others are that way too. Care Patrol, assisted living locators.
That one.
Right. But I tell people, do not use a place Vermont. You will regret it. I'm not going to go any further there. Not going to waste my time. So the other thing that I'm close to, but I'm not a medical or social worker, is the geriatric or aging life care managers. Right. I do try to put together the care team, collaborate with them, put together the care plan, to work in a holistic approach to the care and putting together the team to take care of the person with dementia. So it also takes care of the caregiver, because my client is not the person with dementia. My client is the family member or the family that is taking care of them and help them not just take care of their loved one, manage the care, but also practice self-care and
Mhm.
prevention, right? So again, with that, and what it does is it reduces their stress, their sense of overwhelm, isolation, right? So help them sleep better at night. That's what I try to do.
Now, were
And
people
like I said,
receptive?
I needed somebody like that 20
Were,
years
pe-
ago.
were people receptive when you asked for the help in getting the business plan up and going with like how do you get paid? Because there's with some people there's a mentality of, feast or famine and that nope, this person might be taken out of my pocket, so they're unwilling to help. But
Mhm.
how was it? I know it's small, so there should be less concern about competition, but I'm just
Mhm.
kind of curious.
Yeah, and I like to say that I may be in a niche,
Hmm.
but it's a huge one because there's millions of caregivers, right?
For
But
sure.
yes, that's a very good question because I am private pay. I don't go through insurance. I either work on an hourly basis, uh, especially people have just some immediate quick needs and need a little bit of advice and some support and resources. But dementia is a long-term, complicated, and sometimes long distance situation, right?
Hmm.
So I also have a monthly plan, which gives them a few hours a month of my time. However they want to use it, they can break it up. They can do it in bigger chunks or smaller chunks, however they want to. I'm very flexible about that. So I actually was almost half the fee when I started 7.5 years ago. And then about 3.5 years ago, at the advice of a networking business group, they said, you're undercharging and you should simplify your structure. It was too complicated before. And nobody has balked. And because if somebody, and I'll tell you what the fee is, now it's $75 an hour, which is about half of the geriatric care managers, or $300 a month, and it could be discounted if it's multiple months.
Right.
But nobody's balking at it because if they can't afford that, I don't have a client anyway, right? Yeah, if somebody has very, very limited funds, they're not going to be able to afford even that. But very often, I just say, let's have an initial consultation. And if they say I really can't spend much money with it, well, I said, don't worry about it. Today is free. Here's a little bit of advice. If you find you need more and you can pay that fee, let me know. That's not, as you can probably tell, it's not what drives me.
Right.
I don't live off of what I make from my business. I work for my whole life. I have an income which pays my bills.
Right.
So it's a nice thing that I do it to be fairly compensated, but it's not what I live off of. It's not what motivates me.
So, so it's Cohen Consultants.
Yes.
Tell me exactly like the title, the role, and if I were coming in for the consultation, a couple questions you might ask
Mm-hmm.
would get started.
Mm-hmm. First, I'll explain the consultants.
Yeah.
uh, so when I registered it, one, I didn't want to have to change it at some point to consult or consultants. Two, I've been in management. I've been a supervisor. I didn't want to manage people. No,
I
thank
know,
you.
right? I have trouble managing myself sometimes.
There you go. So what really happens is, and this goes along with how I work, is when I have the initial consultation and I'm asking a lot of questions about their health, finances, housing, support, family that's involved or not involved, that type of thing, and we move forward, then I am determining who else to bring in to the team to work with us. And again, I wanted to mention about certified senior advisor is a designation which is held by a lot of people in finance and real estate, insurance, and mortgage, because it's not just making a suitable recommendation, it's about protecting our most vulnerable population from fraud, abuse, and predators, right? And what we're doing is taking that holistic approach. You're not just, okay, I took care of Mrs. Smith, now I'll take care of Mr. Jones. Instead of thinking, who else does my client need to take
Right.
care of? I'm always thinking that way. Who else should they be working with that'll help them feel less stressed and overwhelmed? So that's what I try to do is bring in those pieces and take the closest analogy, if I don't know if you've ever heard of it or your listeners, is wraparound from social work,
Mhm.
which is when a kid is in trouble and they bring all the different elements in, the teacher, the minister, the cop, the other advisors, the family, and get the kid back on track. That's what I'm trying to do with senior care, not just work in a silo by myself, but work with everybody else to give the proper care to the loved one. So that's how I work going forward. So when after I've referred people to, say, a housing advisor or other people, then they're helping them. And then we're checking back in occasionally. That becomes the consultants. They become the consultants. And then I can go be starting or working with somebody else while they're being helped by them. Because some people, for instance, they're not quite ready to bring in home care, right?
Right.
Or they're not ready to look at housing. Although I tell them, I mean, this is the first piece of advice. The sooner you talk to me and some of people I collaborate with, the better. If you're in denial, keep kicking the can down the road or shoving it under the rug, so to speak, not having a conversation with your family, it's only going to get worse. And it's going to be harder to make those changes. And the sooner that you have some plans in place, like plan A, B, C, right? And bring in various advisors, like go find a care community, put down a deposit that you feel would be appropriate, that you would like and you feel your loved one would like. Then you've made that decision. You can sleep better at night knowing you've done it, and you just go on the waiting list until they're ready.
That made me think of one of the questions I had, which was at which point in this journey, when do they contact you? What's the ideal time for people to contact you? Like, okay, for me, let's say my dad's 70 and he just had this event. Um, let's say I know he's predisposed. Do I wait till I start seeing signs, or is this something I could do now and say, hey, Bill, this recently happened with my father. I know there's a probability of this. What are some things I should start looking at? Are there some things I should start setting up? And, just even having this conversation has opened up so much, like with the trust thing and going, hey, should I consider something like this for my father? So when is that time that somebody reaches out and starts this kind of progress?
I guess I could, it sounds a little cheesy, but earlier the better.
Yeah.
You're thinking that there is a problem, there probably is, or there might be. And even in your case, for instance, you could gain some information. Okay, what should I be thinking about? What should I be looking for? What should I already have in place?
Yeah.
It's like the old line I heard when I was in financial service. You can't buy fire insurance on a burning building, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of health and life insurance and long-term care and things like that, that once you get to a certain point, it's either very expensive or you'll get denied. So
Yeah.
the sooner that, if you know that there's a situation or a possibility, it's better to plan in advance. But if you have a aging family member, having those conversations, again, the first things besides like what I did about with the Alzheimer's Association, go to the support group, that type of thing, is make sure the legal documents are in place. I mean, that's probably that besides safety, and there are a lot of concerns with safety. It's not just tripping hazards and firearms and things like that. Is make sure that the will's in place, the advanced directive, which appoints the personal representative, the power of attorney, the post. It's called a little bit different in different states, the physician's order, life-sustaining treatment, but that's what for the EMTs or the care facility. What measures are we going to take if their health declines or they need emergency, invasive care? I'll tell you a quick story about that. Right, and soon after the hurricane, we're doing the advanced directive with my mom, and she still had enough cognitive ability to answer the questions. She hadn't slipped that far yet. And this was a case that was in the news big time in the mid-2000s. I don't know if you'll have heard of it, maybe. So I'm going through the questions. I say to Mom, do you want to end up like Terry Schiavo? This was a woman in Florida who was a persistent vegetative state for like a couple of years.
I
The
remember that.
families were battling, the politicians got involved. It was horrible. My mom was very clear in her answer, absolutely not. And I put that on the advance directive. I told my aunt, this is what I heard. This is mom's wishes. She said, okay, that's what we'll go by. And I consider that still to this day a gift. She told, and this is an individual, it's a personal thing. Not everybody makes these choices. My stepfather wanted all possible measures taken, everything, intravenous, you know, you name it, you know, tubes,
All of it.
artificial nutrition, you name it, antibiotics. Mom wouldn't want anything. But as she progressed, I didn't have to make that tough decision. I knew what her wishes were, let her go, keep her out of pain, keep her comfortable, keep her as hydrated and nutritious as we could. And towards the end, as I said to the hospice nurse, increase her morphine so that she's not hurting, and I'll have what she's having.
Yep. Yeah.
Right? Because
Oh,
I
yeah.
needed something. My stress
Man.
level was high. Yeah.
Yeah, I know this the past week with, like I said, my dad going in and ending up intubated for my knee surgery.
So sorry.
Just, all those things, all this stuff you're kind of talking about was something that hit me. And it's because, and it was supposed to be routine. And, and I should know, having spent 12 years in the medical industry and worked level one trauma, is that you sign the paper because, yes, even though it is routine, things can go wrong. And it's really not routine to be intubated with medicine and have your body cut open. No matter how many times a day they do it, it may be routine for them. But, my advice is kind of like you said, is especially with advanced directives and whatnot, have that all set ahead of time, because you end up in a situation, like you said, when you guys started off, y'all were located in different places.
Yeah, we're
When
all
this
over the
happened with
country.
my father, I was on vacation, and when things start happening and then there's only other family members to go off of, and maybe you're the decision maker and you're not even around, it can be very challenging and difficult.
Absolutely.
So
Not to mention stressful.
yeah, and that was kind of the the part that really got me, was the stress and knowing you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, knowing you should, but then of course once it's all done and they took him off the vent and he's starting to improve, and I'm like, I can finally sleep and I finally start eating. I'm like,
Glad to hear that.
you should have been doing that the whole time. Like, what were you thinking? But,
Right.
there's something in the way you feel versus the way your mind doesn't logically think when you're under that form of stress, that even though you should, that eating is the best way to increase your energy and to keep you healthy and keep you from getting sick,
Right.
maybe you still don't do it. And
Right.
so, it's never more important, I think, than to understand the concept that the situation you were in and what's come out of it, and the situation I just went through, like, it's going to happen to all of us at some point.
Some way.
And so being prepared for that
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the key, so you do not go off the rails, because when it happens, it's going to be unexpectedly and it's going to happen very slow and fast all at once, but it kind of surpasses continuums, if you will, until things settle down, and maybe you end up in kind of a long-term situation. Maybe they get better, or there's instances where people pass away and people never get that resolve, and the journey is short. But regardless, figure that way to take care of yourself and start understanding some of these things and getting a handle on it. But do you work solo or do you employ other people? Do you have other people that help people through, whether it's, you said you're versed with a business background, so you could help people with insurance questions, or, hey, should I do this or that? But do you have any other people with specialties or people that you bring on that help?
So again, I am a solopreneur, as some people would say. I don't have any employees, but I like to also say is because there's very few people do what I do, I don't compete with anyone. I collaborate or partner with everyone.
Okay.
At some point, I may need every possible financial, economic, medical, social work type collaborator to help on the team. So yeah, I wanted to go back to something you were saying that everybody at some point feels guilt. They feel, am I doing enough? Did I do something too soon or too late? Did I make the right decision? Like housing, and people always ask me, that's one of the top FAQs, when is the right time to move them into a care facility or care community? And I said, very, very rarely does anybody hit the Goldilocks just right range.
Yeah.
Usually it's a little too late, too little soon, usually more too late. The people I work with say, I wish they had called me sooner, but I'll do the best I can, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's usually not till, my great grandmother had it, and growing up multi-generational, like it was the whole family, like the sons lived on the side, the mom lived in the middle, but this is rural Texas and gas stoves, and at some point maybe she left the stove on, I think it was, but there was stuff like that where it's like, hey, you know, there's usually some sort of incident of we're not going to let them die of a gas leak or, use knives anymore because she used to cook
Right.
all the time.
Take the
And
ammo out of
that
the guns.
and that was kind of the catalyst to go, okay, we need to start looking for a care
Mhm.
facility or something.
I remember somebody in my support group a while back, he actually passed away before her. She had dementia B, he had other issues, but he realized it was two signs were game changers. One, driving with her, and she suddenly took a right turn across, cutting off traffic. That was one. The other was she put her cell phone in the microwave.
Oh,
Ooh, yeah.
man.
Yeah, okay, things are very different now.
Um,
Now, let me reassure your listeners and viewers that I can't remember if I heard this from it might have been from the author Still Alice, the movie with Julianne Moore, Lisa Genova.
mhm.
It's not a matter of, we all lose things. We misplace our phones, our glasses, keys, whatever. It's not a matter of if whether you lost the keys or not. Do you remember what the keys are for?
Oh,
There's a big difference there because we're all busy. We're all moving things. You put the keys in a place you usually don't put them.
yeah,
Oh, why did I put them there? Okay, you're busy, right? But if you forget, what are these?
yeah, yeah. That would be way more alarming.
Yeah.
So I got another question. We had kind of talked about this. I had it as a question of the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, but then I wanted to discuss that you and I had talked before we started recording on, I mentioned that it runs in my family on both sides of my mom's family. And so it's always a concern for my mom, myself, as it was for my grandparents when they were alive. And you said that whether it was maybe your mother had a particular version of it, but you weren't necessarily at the same risk. And so I
Mhm.
want to hear a little bit about that because I too would like to know how, what my prognosis may look like down the road.
Excellent. No, it's a great question, and I love to inform. I love to raise awareness and educate. Speaking, got to go in a couple days at a care community this week. Is first about Alzheimer's and dementia. Think in terms of cancer. The umbrella term is just
Hmm.
cancer. Then you have different kinds,
Right.
right? Brain, prostate, breast, whatever it is, lung cancer. Dementia is the umbrella term for all the others underneath. Alzheimer's happens to be the most prevalent, about 2/3 of the cases. Unfortunately, yes, it's terminal, progressive, debilitating. It's on the top 10 list of deaths in the United States. One, it's the most expensive, and two, it's the only one without a cure,
Oh, I didn't know
which is
that.
quite unfortunate. But there are over 100 different types of dementia, most of which we've never heard, well, we never hear about. But some of the more common ones are vascular dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, frontal temporal dementia, FTD, and then various others. Also, it can be alcohol-induced, it can be brain trauma, it can be a lot of other reasons people do get it. I had a client who was a former college and NFL star back in the 50s and 60s, and all that repeated hitting. You may have seen the movie Concussion. It was with Denzel Washington, I think, and they talk about that. And actually, my university has been doing the research, or was it CTE? I believe it's called.
Yeah.
The acronym, right? And that's scary. So there's a lot of different things. Now, some forms of dementia are not genetic related at all. And some of the ones I mentioned, like alcohol or brain induced, although it could be that by doing those behaviors, it turns on the genes. You may have heard the term dirty genes.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, yeah, you may want to look that up. It's not my field.
Genealogist.
But you can do everything right, perfectly fine, and just one thing triggers those genes and they take off. In fact, actually, the other thing Lisa Genova talks about in a wonderful TED Talk is that you can do everything right and still get it, and then vice versa, do everything wrong, live a long life, and never get dementia.
Right.
Nobody really knows. You just have your probabilities. But if you do certain things, and this is going to get into my mom, I'm going to tell you a story, certain behaviors and environment stuff, you're going to help your chances of not getting it, lowering your risk. Now, two areas in particular, two types of dementia tend to be more genetic. Early onset Alzheimer's,
okay,
or FTD tend to be either younger or genetic. Plus, you may have heard about the APOE4 genetic marker. And that was also talked about in Still Alice, because she was a college professor, the woman in the book and the movie, which the book is actually better. And the question was, she didn't want to tell her family, but when she finally did, said, you may or may not want to know. And there were two siblings, I don't want to give away too much, didn't want to know. One who was planning to have kids wanted to know because she may end up passing along that genetic marker. Now, when it comes to my mom, she's a little bit different. She became symptomatic in her early 70s. Nobody else in the family has Alzheimer's. There may be a little mild cognitive impairment because my aunts and uncles are in their late 80s and early 90s.
Right.
So, but other than that, they're doing pretty well. The other was, so she wasn't that old, not genetic with her. However, she was living on the Gulf Coast, toxins in the pollution and chemicals in the air, soil, and water, mold and mildew. She used to smoke, didn't exercise. She barely walked the dog to the corner. I said, go farther, go farther. She didn't want to get in a pool because there's kids in there. Okay. She was socially isolated a few miles off the coast in Mississippi. She was in the caregiver role for my late stepfather. And this may have been one of the biggest, she was a printmaker. It's called intaglio. She was etching into metal plates and then putting it into an acid bath for something like 30 years.
Wow.
So some combination, or maybe even one of them, is probably why she got Alzheimer's. And again, she's like the poster child for genetics, or should I say environment, and for behavioral or lifestyle choices. So I tell people, stop eating crap, do something like the Mediterranean diet, get your sleep, keep active socially and physically and mentally. And those are the things that'll help you maintain your health. You don't have those underlying conditions we heard so much about in the pandemic, which may cause you to get dementia of some kind. Think about it. And I'm not the first person to say this. Where would we have been during the pandemic if as a society we had been healthier?
Yeah,
Probably gotten through it a lot better.
Yeah. Uh, man, that's I was actually thinking about that on when I was driving yesterday because I went to visit my father in rehab, and I'm driving out, I'm thinking of this interview, and I'm thinking of all these things. I'm thinking of being a podcaster, and similarly to you, that if you'd asked me, would I become a podcaster years ago?
Yeah.
Probably not. But then there's um this component of like you said, you needed purpose. And when I was laid off and I
Mhm.
didn't have purpose and didn't want to go back into healthcare, this is what gave me the purpose because I was declining.
Mhm.
My health was declining due to lifestyle choices, which was, drinking a lot, smoking. I was depressed. I was on medications
Right.
and all these different things. And, but it gave me this thought. I was like, man, like, yes, COVID was bad. Both of my grandparents did pass away during that time. Their
Mhm.
component was a factor. Um, Although it wasn't the total factor, there were other comorbidities and stuff within there.
Mhm.
However, um, it's I think of it, you know, I can't be mad at it because it's
Mhm.
already happened, and whatever happened as a result of it, whether we were duped somewhat, I was laid off as a result of it. My career totally changed. Depression came from it.
Mhm.
It's happened, so we can't undo it. So we have to make peace with what's come out of it.
Mhm.
However, I look back and I think, is it going to be, I remember growing up and learning about, the Spanish flu and all these things. And at what point, what is history going to say when they put this into a history book?
Mhm.
How are they going to spin it? What are they going to say that came out of it? And what are we going to get from it? Is it this thing of health, like you stated? But is there this component too? I'm from Texas. I'm from the South. I was stationed in Meridian, Mississippi before I went to Japan. So
Mhm.
I've been through Biloxi, Gulfport, and all those on the way when I was stationed in
Mhm.
Florida for a long time and lived in Florida.
Yeah.
But whether it's environmental factors or personal, like as you were talking about that, I'm like, man, we really got to take better care of the earth in terms of pollution, the
Mhm.
soil, littering, food, all of it. But yeah, I'm curious like how that's going to be spun.
Mhm.
But as a
The-
society, as a world, we have a lot of work to do. And I think
Mhm.
about what the caregiving thing, and in terms of what we're talking about now, it's why the conversation, the thought process is important to
Right.
get ahead of this because nothing's going to change for positive if people don't put themselves in the state of mind frame to see these things, to understand that these are all contributing factors. And um, what do we have? We have that the opportunity and the ability to get a hold of it or to come together and collaborate
Mhm.
like you said, as
Right.
opposed to, the podcast is kind of based on collaboration. We're all more alike than we are different. So let's
Mhm.
come together and figure things out so
Mhm.
we can all have better lives. We can
Right.
all thrive a little.
Um, Tying together two things here,
Hmm.
the pandemic and caregiving, especially for dementia. One of the
Oh,
tragic things about that period where people were locked into facilities, people weren't able to see their loved ones and vice versa. And that was increasing the isolation and probably progressed people's condition, their dementia or whatever they had. And, I remember talking to a couple of clients, loved ones through the window. Uh, and I'm just thinking, well, why is the physical therapist able to come in here with their, whatever you want to call bunny
yeah.
suits or what have you,
PPE.
with masks and covered and gloves and everything else? Why can't we do that and go visit our loved ones? What
Oh, because
I hopefully we
there's not
will
enough
learn.
stuff. There's not enough materials.
Yeah. Well, we hopefully we will learn from that. that we can do better, because too many people, by the time that they saw their loved one, they had progressed and they didn't know who they
Yeah.
were, or they passed away. It didn't have closure. That's cruel.
What was it
And
like
I'm
for
not saying that
you?
mandates or lockdowns are good or bad. I'm just
Right.
saying we need to do it better.
What was it like for you, kind of, because you started on this path a little before, so you had probably just gotten kind of rolling and maybe what you felt like, I got a grasp on this and what I'm doing, and then the pandemic hits, and how did what was your take on it? How did it impact you, if any, or did it increase your purpose and zeal for continuing to do this, or what?
That's a really good question. I help people, not just the Pacific Northwest, but nationally, and
Right.
even a little bit into Canada. I have a client in the UK who's flying in tonight to see her mom. I've been working with her for almost 2 years,
Oh,
not
that's
quite.
cool.
So I can help people from anywhere, which leads into, I always thought that I could help beyond Oregon, Washington, etc. But the pandemic, people started looking for support elsewhere because I couldn't do it in person. So various things, I joined an international group, business group. I started doing podcasts. I like to say from New England to New Zealand.
Hmm.
Facebook group has members, dementia caregivers from all the states and provinces and all 6 continents, which is really cool. Haven't found a penguin in Antarctica yet. uh, and just various things like that. So what I like to say is the pandemic handed lemons and make limoncello,
Yeah.
which is better than lemonade.
Yes, sir.
So
Man.
yeah, it enabled me to start working with people everywhere, more than I had been. It started very slow. So in my case, it was a bit of a gift, even though it was challenging.
Yeah.
It just changed how I worked, how I help people. For instance, one case, and actually it ended up being mediation, but it was also about the care plan. 4 siblings around the Northwest, 4 different cities in 3 different states. And we did it all virtually, except for the guy who hired me here in the Portland area. We met personally, and I met with the mom personally. So yeah, it helped a lot. Most of the time though, I I definitely don't meet the person with dementia, except in very rare cases, like that client who's
Right.
flying in today. I go visit her mom all the time, but most of the time I don't visit with them, and the vast majority of my clients are virtual. So
What do
in
you
that case, the pandemic didn't hurt. It helped.
what do you enjoy the most about what you're doing? What really fulfills you?
So what I didn't mention with my state job, I was working for motor vehicles.
The DMV?
Yes, DMV. I mean, the last 15 years was in headquarters, when actually one part of the job was good because I got to travel around our state.
Yeah.
Okay. But sitting in a cubicle, dealing with bureaucracy and red tape and a horrible boss definitely was not fulfilling and satisfying. It
Hurry up and
provided
wait.
it provided an income, it provided benefits, and it gave me a security when I retired, right? The difference with this is fulfilling, this is gratifying, this is satisfying to help people, because all those jobs I did in the past, they're all different, right? But
Yeah.
it's helping people in customer service.
Yeah. Mine's the same way. It's always been something of service, and like I've always said that y- the pandemic crushed me, the layoff, because it was a little piece of my identity.
Mhm.
But once I realized that, well, my identity to the core is really, I'm a kind, caring, compassionate person
And it
who
shows.
loves to help others.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be limited to that. So I just turn to podcasting, and, with a bigger reach.
Mhm.
And so, and and I think about this in a parallel. I mean, I'm not at retirement age yet. I'm a little bit younger than you, but
Mhm.
in terms of going, like, um, maybe you feel like you found what your real purpose was later. So, in terms of that, what I always like to ask people before we end is, what is one thing unexpected that has come from this journey and taking this leap into uh, Cohen caregiving consultants.
Hmm,
Something you never would have thought in a million years that's happened that's just money couldn't buy.
that's a tough one. I mean, I could talk about where I thought I was going to get my referrals or my business from. I thought it was going to come more from the senior care industry,
Uh-huh.
and it hasn't because too many people do have that silo
Yeah.
mentality. I'm going to do my job, that's it. But so it has come from so many other resources, so many other places and industries. So I usually tell people if you may be working with somebody and they, yeah, I want to work with you, but boy, I'm really worried about my mom. She's showing signs of dementia and I have some tough decisions to make. And they can be thinking, oh, they should talk to Bill Cohen. I'd say that's still the biggest thing. It was very frustrating early on. I think it's that another thing was going back to financial services when I was in that. I couldn't sell worth a damn. I mean, I was good at service and advice.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it back then, how was sales done? Dialing for dollars, knocking on doors,
Yep.
direct mail, the old school stuff. And I wasn't very good at it. Today, it's about networking, building relationships, social media. I have a
Sell
website.
yourself. I feel like my job is to sell myself
Yeah.
because if people know who I am, what I stand for, and what I'm about, regardless of what you're asking me to do in exchange for whatever we're exchanging, you know the principles I will bring to the task.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So those are probably my biggest surprises that I could do it, that I could do a business being self-employed. And the thing is that all those other jobs helped me to do what I do
Yeah,
today. And of course, my experience with my mom,
yeah.
because it is personal.
That's what, with me, I felt like until I put together, till I said, till I treated the company that laid me off like an ex-girlfriend and said, I forgive you. Now let's see what I learned.
Mhm.
Man, I couldn't tell you whether it's my getting my master's in healthcare administration, the process of it, running clinics, working with physicians, having to manage physicians and talk with other administrators and big bean counters, COOs and VPs and CFOs of $7 million hospital such organizations.
Mhm.
You know, it taught me a lot. All the interviews I conducted for a lead nurse taught me how to interview as a podcaster. And so, yeah, kind of like you, I didn't quite get to the retirement and the stability part of having that, but in terms of like, hey, I've done this for a year now and I'm working on putting some stuff, accountability stuff to go with the podcast, but
Mhm.
kind of like you said, I can do this. And um, as long as I'm out there and people get value from what I'm doing, which is telling stories like yours,
Mhm.
putting
And
resources out there, letting people know they're not alone and hey, you have somewhere to turn to. It's just a conversation, a listen and a conversation away,
and I
you
think that
know?
is a key. Finding a purpose, something to get up for in the morning, something to go out and do. Because, like, for my job, too many people retired and they have nothing to go to, and they're gone in
Yeah.
a few months or a couple of years. They've lost their work family, they've lost their job, their reason to get up in the morning. And this is kind of cold, but it's true. There's a gerontologist here who talks about if somebody retires, they go sit in the lazy boy and they're watching reruns in the news all day. That is a recipe for cognitive quicksand.
Oh, I like that word.
It's a little harsh, but it's true that unless you get up in the morning and have a reason to do something, have either a job or a hobby or volunteering or an activity. I've been for the past 14 months or so, I've started playing pickleball. I'm loving it,
Awesome.
fast growing sport, right? I didn't know because I used to horrible at tennis.
Yeah.
So you never know. So it's very important that each morning, and that includes weekends. We're doing this on Sunday, right?
Hmm.
Right? Every day I'm doing something, but I can do as much or as little as I want to because it's something that's very gratifying.
Yeah.
That's what we all need.
And it is very true. You know, my grandfather, after he retired from his second job at 82, it was within a few years of the recliner life, you know, and then it was like he started showing a few symptoms, and then we had to take the keys away, and you slowly,
Mhm.
and yeah, so it's tough, but it
Well,
definitely a reminder to be out there, and that's what I always say is regardless of what day of the week it is, I try to wake up and go, I'm gonna make today as most fulfilled as I can, whether it be
mhm.
with my surrounding family or talking to someone like yourself. And, you know, I'm just thankful I get the opportunity to do this and, you know, exchange energy and stuff with another person and learn what people are all about. And I'm thankful to know that there's caring people out there such as yourself that help people get through this because we're all going to face it. And that's been the greatest thing about podcasting is just meeting people, learning what they do, and learning that there is so much out there.
Well, we want to have a little bit better reason or purpose or reason to get up each day. But it makes me think about the classic Mel Brooks line: wake up in the morning, look at the obituaries. If your name's not in it, make breakfast.
All right. Before we go, I offer everyone, you can ask me a question if you have any questions. If not, that's okay. But
No, we're good.
all right, man. Well,
Great.
I will let you know when this is going to come out. I'll drop you the link in an email and whatnot. And it was great talking to you.
Likewise.
All
Appreciate
right,
it.
man. You
Good to
have a
meet
great rest of your day.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye. Well, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Remember, go out and be the person that you want to meet.
Let's go.
Asteroid of fear.